Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're joining us from today. It's great to have you with us. I'm Jo Tyndall, Environment Director at the OECD, and along with my colleagues from the OECD Secretariat, I'm really delighted to welcome you to this Green Talk Live, where we're going to be discussing urban water scarcity risks in light of our new report, adapting the Paris Metropolitan Area to a water-scarce future. Now, in recent years, cities in different parts of the world, like Cape Town, Mexico City, and Barcelona, have faced severe water shortages after periods of prolonged droughts, and that's forced residents to dramatically reduce their water consumption. Now, these events do show how vulnerable cities are to water scarcity. And it's pretty scary when you think about cities of millions of people running short of water. Droughts are the main problem, but for urban areas, things like sealed soils, limited groundwater, and rising temperatures only make the problem worse. And these are, of course, urban areas are where the majority of the world's population live. By 2050, an estimated 2 billion people will face greater drought risks, and urban populations will bear the brunt of that. Climate change is intensifying these challenges. Rising temperatures dry soils out faster, rainfall patterns are becoming more erratic, and groundwater levels are dropping. In Europe, for example, the number of droughts has increased by 29% since 2000, and that is compared with the 2 decades before then. And droughts are no longer limited to traditionally dry areas. Even London, for example, in 2022 saw parts of the Thames River drying up. And Paris is no exception. Despite the rainfall those of us living here have experienced in the last year. So that's why the OECD has been working closely with local authorities in the Paris Metropolitan Area to assess the risks in the context of climate change and to evaluate how prepared the region is to adapt. We are excited to share the findings of our report with you today. A reminder, it's called the report Adapting the Paris Metropolitan Area to a Water-Scarce Future. So do have a look at the report and join us now in discussing how cities can build resilience in the face of growing water scarcity. Now, just before we get into it, I wanted to draw to your attention that interpretation for this Green Talks Live is available. And you can use the button at the bottom of the screen to switch from English to French. So, what this new report clearly shows is that while robust water infrastructure has helped the Paris Metropolitan Area manage historical challenges, it may not be enough to protect the region from more severe droughts in the future. We estimate that droughts could cost the Parisian economy up to 3 billion euros per event. And this doesn't take account of the lasting and potentially irreversible damage to ecosystems and water sources. Well, of course, the lessons from Paris extend far beyond its borders. And this report introduces an innovative approach to assessing the economic costs of urban droughts and highlights best practices from around the world that other cities facing similar challenges can draw on. For today's discussion, we've invited experts from Mexico, France, and the Netherlands, all of whom have worked extensively on strengthening climate resilience to drought risks in urban areas. We're going to explore their experiences, discuss how their insights can help other countries, and examine ways of overcoming existing challenges. To kick off our discussion, Sophie Lavaud, who is a policy analyst at the OECD Environment Directorate and the lead author of the report, is going to present its key findings. And a reminder, adapting the Paris Metropolitan Area to a water-scarce future. We'll then invite 3 excellent panelists to share their views and experience. So I would like it if you could please join me in welcoming first Blanca Jimenez Cisneros. She is the ambassador of Mexico to France and a renowned expert on water-related risks. With extensive experience in water and wastewater treatment, reuse, and pollution control, she also contributed to the IPCC's Adaptation Working Group as a coordinating lead author on freshwater sources. We're also joined by Charles Azé, who is Deputy Director for Sustainable Development Planning at the French Ministry of Ecological Transition. Charles played a key role in developing France's national water plan to address resource shortages in the face of climate change, and he now leads efforts on urban planning policies. And third, we have Wouter Beiersbergen, who is Senior Advisor in the Resilience Department of the Municipality of The Hague in the Netherlands. Now, initially working extensively on crisis management, he now focuses on how cities can absorb shocks. His recent research examines the urban impacts of water scarcity, labour market shortages, and geopolitical tensions. So after these panel interventions, we're going to open the floor for questions. You can send questions at any time during the event using the Q&A function in Zoom, and we will try to address as many of them as possible within the time we've got available. With that, thank you so much for joining us today, and I'm going to hand over the floor now to Sophie to present the key findings of the report.
Well, thanks, Jo. Good morning, good afternoon, and evening to everyone. I'm very excited today to present our latest report. I'm gonna share my screen right now. Please let me know if you see the slide. Okay. So first of all, I believe it's worth saying that drought is no longer an issue that is confined to arid regions, as Jo was saying. While droughts are increasing in frequency and severity in many parts of the globe, rapid urbanization and increased irrigation have amplified their effects. Concentration of population in cities has increased water demand locally. Irrigation has developed globally, requiring more and more water for agricultural production. And this increased water demand exacerbates drought effect, especially in urban areas where the demand is concentrated. In addition, soil sealing in urban areas reduce water storage options, and hence urban dwellers depend on resources that are outside the city and used for other purposes with increasing demand. So today, urban areas are therefore more and more exposed, and around 30% of the world's largest urban centers are already at risk of severe water shortages. This is what you can see on this map. And focusing now on the Paris region, let me first start by saying that it has not experienced severe impact in the past 50 years. This apparent robustness comes from strong measures that have been implemented since the 50s, more or less. So first, water consumption. It has significantly declined in recent years, and it is due to more efficient drinking water consumption, but also to the decline of the large industries that were located in the region. So now, if you look at drinking water consumption, for instance, in Paris, it's relatively low compared to other cities globally. In addition, urban infrastructure are maintaining low river flows and river levels. So you can see on this map, in yellow, you have 4 lake reservoirs that are upstream Paris and that regulate the water flows, and they can support up to 70% of the water flows in the summer months. You also have locks all along the rivers in the region, but also in France, that help maintain the river levels. And this is why in 2022, when the Rhine was stopped, the transportation on the Rhine was stopped, there was no impact on the Seine River. And finally, you have a very strong inter-operator collaboration throughout the region that ensures drinking water supply for most residents. But climate projections paint a concerning picture. Because of increased temperature and erratic rainfall patterns, drought could be up to 10 times longer and more severe in terms of water levels. So it would translate, for instance, in lower river flows with possible decrease up to 30%. Also, you will have more evapotranspiration that will make the soils drier, so an increase of 16%, for instance, by 2050. And this shift will place immense stress on existing infrastructure that may not be able to withstand future climate impact. In addition to shrinking water supply, water demand is actually expected to rise for different reasons. So population growth first, an increase of 5% by 2050, but also an increase in irrigation needs of the national reindustrialization strategy of the country. And what we see is that today the irrigation needs in the region are quite low, actually, but because of the increased temperature and the more frequent heat wave and the soil that will dry up, there will be more need for irrigation. And in total, we expect like around 12% increase in water abstraction by 2050, which means that when water supply will contract, we will observe increase in water demand that will put the region at risk of water scarcity. Drought will have economic impact. First, the low water level will generate water restrictions on the main rivers or also on the main aquifers. It will limit manufacturing, energy production, and irrigation. At the same time, the drier soils will affect housing due to clay swelling that is a very common impact in France, but also crops. And this direct impacts on agriculture and manufacturing production will disrupt the supply chains, leading to cascading effects across multiple sectors in the region, but also outside the region in France and in Europe due to trade relationships. So in total, economic loss could reach 2.5 billion euros for the region, but 3 billion when you consider the impact outside the region. And this is what you can see on the figure on the right. To give you a point of comparison, in 2010, the Xynthia storm was considered one of the France's worst natural disasters, and it costed the French economy 2.5 billion euros. So addressing this risk requires a continuous risk-informed approach that you can find on this diagram. So first, you need to assess the risk that will then inform strategies and plans and help select measures that will be implemented. And then you can assess the impact or the effectiveness of these measures on drought levels. And to evaluate the preparedness of the region, what we did is to look at or to assess the risk awareness of stakeholders in the region, the coherence of existing strategies and plans, and also the effectiveness of the current measures under future drought scenarios. And I'm going to use this diagram to share the recommendation of our report. So first, risk assessment. Our analysis showed that stakeholders in the region and in France more broadly are well aware that drought will increase in severity, but yet they have not necessarily assessed their vulnerability, and therefore they are not aware of the potential risk of disruption or the water scarcity risk. This lack of awareness has multiple explanations, such as insufficient knowledge of water demand by type of user that would help assess the possible vulnerabilities, but also insufficient certainty on climate projection to assess water supply. So our report recommends to better monitor water use to start with, to project supply and demand, considering climate change, to identify exposure and vulnerability to drought, but also to communicate on this risk and raise awareness. Looking at existing plans and strategies, it's obvious that France and the various local institutions of the Seine watershed have set ambitious drought resilience strategies involving water demand, supply, and quality measures. So what we see is a very strong quantitative goal to reduce water demand, either through lower water consumption or through substitutes to water abstraction, such as water reuse. But they remain fragmented and short-term, with no strategy going beyond 2030. So it's kind of hard to account for the effects of climate change. Therefore, a more integrated, long-term, cross-sectoral approach is needed. For instance, it's important to make sure that the agricultural energy policies are aligned with drought resilience plan. It's very important to take into account future risk, future climate risk in this strategy. It's also important to consider water and drought resilience in urban planning to avoid worsening drought impact on the long run, and to strengthen upstream, downstream, as well as urban and peri-urban coordination to avoid social risk and make sure that water is available to all. Turning now to the measures, we have looked separately to water demand and water supply measures. So water demand is how you reduce water consumption. And as mentioned earlier, the region has made considerable efforts to reduce water demand, and it leaves, unfortunately, limited room for maneuver to reduce it further. However, continued efforts from all water users are needed to prevent drought impacts, so to prevent drought to be exacerbated by human pressure, but also to limit the vulnerability of water users in the region. So water demand measures can be improved, and they must be improved so that we avoid implementing water demand measure only during crisis, but also with the idea of reducing water demand on the long term. For that, awareness campaigns and training adapted to each consumer levels will be needed. Water efficient technology can be used to improve or to limit irrigation demand, but also to reduce water demand in households or in firms and companies. Then it's important to incorporate scarcity risk into water allocation mechanisms so that they reflect a more flexible and more adapted policy, water management policy in the long term. And we have found some collaborative approaches to achieve long-term water abstraction reduction in the region that work quite well and could be leveraged and duplicated. When it comes to water supply now, we have found many promising pilot infrastructure projects that are ongoing in the region to harvest rainwater or foster industrial water reuse. And in addition, we found that nature-based solutions are actually at the core of local institutions, subnational institutions' plan. But more needs to be done to secure alternative water sources that remain insufficiently used, partly due to regulation and the dense habitat features. Similarly, ecosystems protection could be made more efficient. And to do so, steps include improving water network efficiency in rural areas, strengthening leakages monitoring in private network, encouraging greywater reuse, as seen in Japan, Australia, or Spain, scaling rainwater harvesting in urban construction, but also expanding nature-based solutions to increase groundwater storage. And to do so, it's important to understand where are the ecosystems and how they can be best managed. So we need to improve knowledge of ecosystems in the region. Finally, all these measures will require funding, of course. In fact, while water demand may decrease, and resilience needs increase, we may observe a financing gap that needs to be filled. In addition, and we also observed that already, national insurance mechanisms have proven vulnerable to climate change, and there are doubts today on their sustainability on the long run. So we need a comprehensive funding strategy that should rely on assessing a good assessment of public investment needs at all levels, identify potential funding source. And we found, for instance, that water expenditures in France and in the region as well are still relatively low compared to other countries. So that could be a possibility. And also to align financing mechanism with drought resilience goals, because there are multiple national funds today that can help fund adaptation at local level, but they are much more anchored in flood risk management than in drought risk management, although the two are the two sides of the same coin. So as you can see, ensuring drought resilience will require action, and it will build on strengthening risk awareness, improving coordination, investing in sustainable water management, both through curbing water demand and reinforcing water supply measures, including nature-based solutions, but also by developing this whole of society financing strategy. I encourage you to check out our new report that is available in both French and English if you want additional information. And I thank you for your attention. Thanks to all, and over to you, Jo.
Well, thank you very much, Sophie. And I think that's really highlighted that there is no room for complacency, that it's important to anticipate what might happen in the future and plan for it well in advance. So, yeah, anticipation, planning, implementation, evaluation, monitoring, all really important messages that apply well beyond the Paris region. So thank you for introducing this really very important report. So now we move on to the discussion with our panelists. And I want to start with a question for Blanca. Really there, I think it was very notable that Mexico City recently faced a severe water crisis. Having been to Mexico City, I know it's big and sprawling. How has Mexico responded to the risk there? And in your view, what is the top priority for the country and indeed more generally for urban areas at risk of water scarcity? Over to you. Really keen to hear this direct experience.
Thank you very much for your question and for the invitation to share my experience. I really enjoy a lot Sophie's presentation of the report, but let me start replying you by sharing something that was a funny small story between Mexico City and Paris. 35 years ago, I went to Paris to find out how to improve water reuse for human consumption. And I remember perfectly at the time that there were several people in there that was saying, listen, this madam wants to reuse water. Oh, why she is here? We don't need to reuse water. We don't need to take protection of our water. Okay, so now things has passed, and you are seeing now the need that will come for all cities, simply because all cities create an imbalance from the environmental point of view. You have in a very small area, very high demand of water, and you don't have enough resources. And it's not a matter that if it rains a lot or if it doesn't rain a lot, we are going to listen our colleagues from the Netherlands. So I will go a little bit following what Sophie presented and sharing what happened in Mexico City and all the challenges, because we have begun since the 80s to start implementing water demand. And it's always challenging. As she said, it's very important social participation. But in our case, it can be very challenging because our country, compared to the other countries that are going to present, we have 6 months of droughts and 6 months of floods. So when you start convincing people that they need to do a lot of measures, it starts raining. And the next year, they don't remember the problems. So it's really challenging for people to keep that in mind. For us, that has been an important challenge. We have been, now we are really maybe at the limit of the measures that can be implemented on the side of the water demand, but I think that maybe in Paris still there is room to put in place, for example, showers or toilets of low water consumption. We have put them in the 90s, 80s, and this is the biggest demand of water that exists. And also now that because Sophie followed more or less all the recommendations that the IPCC provides for cities. And it's time to make this difference. Some are very difficult to mention. I think I already mentioned the water, the management of water, but the use of new water sources, that's also something that has been implemented in Mexico. Mexico City is the city reusing 100% of its water. So how you are going to increase that. But you need to see, and I think that's the main issue I would like to share with you, is that for cities, we need to see water reuse in the framework of the watershed, because Mexico City is reusing almost all the water we need to wash cars, for fountains, to a lot of municipal uses. And we use it for agriculture, but in a different valley. So we cannot reuse more water from our wastewater because it already belongs to other valley. So in this case, what I want to say is that it's not that simple to increase water reuse, because other people might be already using your wastewater. So that's a very important issue to share, and maybe not take so many time the microphone. I think we already went through all the measures, but for desalination, because for us the sea is very far. And that's also the case of many cities, because you don't have to do efforts to desalinate water, but also the transportation of water is very important. One of the most exciting challenges concerning water, I think, is the one of Mexico City. We're a city at 202 meters above the sea level. It's a closed basin. And so we have had to face all the challenge 30 years ago, and now we are in phase to climate change. But it's clear to us that climate change is an additional stressor. The main thing is to control the cities to continue growing. I think I already replied to you.
Well, thank you so much for that. That's really enlightening to hear the situation that's been faced in Mexico City and the responses you've had. Very interested to hear that your comments about 100% reuse of water, and also really important messaging that it's not a case of simply how much water falls out of the sky in terms of rain versus drought. That is not the answer to water management and water use problems in a very dense and packed urban environment. Very, very interesting. Look, I want to move now to Charles Alzé. So Charles, our report highlights the importance of integrating water resources into spatial planning, particularly at the urban level. And that's obviously an area of particular expertise for you. So if you do spatial planning, it can help improve water storage, regulation, and management. So I'd be keen to ask you what are France's priorities for urban planning. What measures do you believe are going to be most impactful to embed drought resilience into that planning?
Thank you, Jo, for your invitation and this question. As you reminded us during the introduction, it's water is our thermometer for climate change in one of the most vulnerable parameters. But water is also essential for all human development. And in 2022 in France, we suffered a big drought, and it was crucial for water management in cities, as more than 2,000 cities faced significant drinking water supply challenges. That's why in 2023, the French president announced a national water plan, including 48 strategic actions. And I will give some insights on some of the sections specifically concerning urban development and management. And I will approach my discussion at several scales. The first one, the scale of urban design and building, in addition to design features quoted by Blanca just before me. A first essential measure is to take into account rainwater runoff at the parcel level and encourage a reuse of treated wastewater. The first goal is to avoid building on wetlands, but also allows water to be stored in the soil, reducing cost for urban infrastructure and improving their resilience. At the industrial scale, the national plan aims to define water efficiency plans while promoting the reuse of treated wastewater, for which regulatory procedures have been simplified. At the same time, the government financially supports initiatives such as the preservation of wetlands, river renaturation, and the de-sealing of public spaces, what Sophie underlined as nature-based solutions. It's crucial to consider water in the city within the broader cycle, meaning its ability to infiltrate, be naturally stored, and thus protecting the future resource and use. In fact, nature in city with water and associated ecosystems play a key role for the key role in water management, in addition to the other benefits that nature provides, such as well-being, mental health, quality of life. In this regard, the French water agencies, public operator of the French government, contribute to financing local policies for the project protection of natural infiltration areas. Several hundred million euros annually for these special policies. These investments must be seen in the context of long-term regulatory goals, including the EU Nature Restoration Law, which mandates an increase in natural spaces in cities. Another important element is the planning of cities themselves and urban areas. France has introduced regulatory changes since the last dramatic draft of 2022 to align water management planning with urban planning. The goal is to ensure better protection of natural infiltration areas within urban planning. A key element is to have shared governance between water stakeholders on the one hand and planning stakeholders on the other hand. For that, beyond the regulatory changes that occurred recently in France, there are also decision support tools. A national prospective tool named Water 2050 is a model which was developed by the Prime Minister's Task Force, France Strategy. It can simulate the evolution of water resources and urban development up to 2050. This tool allows the local stakeholders to cross national hydrological ecosystem and perspectives from IPCC projections, including, of course, climate change, with urban development scenarios at a local square, 8-kilometer side square. So it's quite precise. And it's a real decision support tool for sustainable urban development, allowing activities and population to be located where water resources will permit. Finally, this local scale is perfect for communication. Raising awareness and communication with the general public remains a very effective tool. In France, we have seen a decrease in average household water consumption in recent years, with an accelerated decrease during drought crisis, with public communication calling for collective vigilance. Finally, water management, as Sophie presented, with the watershed reservoir lakes, this example of Paris, and the importance of large-scale coordination is the water management beyond city boundaries. Water which enters and leaves urban areas largely depends on surrounding territories. That's why it's crucial to implement interterritorial governance involving multiple stakeholders at the regional scales. When it comes to water quality and quantity provided to cities, there is a strong link with agriculture in France, which is the main source of pollution, diffuse pollution of water, and the largest consumer of water. French government, through its water agencies, is setting up contracts with dedicated fundings between water agencies and farmers to protect soils, improve water infiltrations, and promote transitions to agricultural practices that are more respectful of the water cycle. In this regard, innovative approaches are being implemented to protect drinking water capture areas from pesticides, for instance. Regulatory facilities allow local authorities to preempt land and implement low pesticide farming, often linked to broader local food strategy, such as supplying the local canteen. In conclusion, water cannot be separated from the urban ecosystem. Our common good must be managed carefully at different scales, from the individual parcel to the regional scale, through prospective tools and public policies. If we manage to design our cities and territories as ecosystems, we will ensure harmonious and sustainable development, while with the guarantee of access to water for all. Thank you for your attention, and thank you again for your invitation.
Thank you so much, Charles. There was a lot in there, and I really liked your description of I guess the water version of the circular economy, in terms of reducing water efficiency, reuse, recycling. Also, particularly interesting to hear about the tool for planning that has been developed, and de-sealing and coming up with nature-based solutions. Super important, I think, for a whole lot of other kind of societal benefits, as well as dealing with water issues. And finally, we know from a lot of the work we do that there's quite often competition for water use, significant competition between urban areas and agriculture, for example. So thinking beyond the boundaries of the urban or the metropolitan area in planning for this, and multi-stakeholder engagement is again super important. Now, our third panelist would like to pass the floor to Walter, and the question here is, The Hague faces growing drought risks, and that obviously poses a threat to the city's freshwater supply as well as to urban development. You've recently been involved in a societal resilience program which emphasizes water security risks. So interested to hear from you, what are the most pressing challenges The Hague faces, and how are you tackling those challenges of drought resilience?
Well, thank you, and thank you for the invitation. As a Dutchman, I have to say we were always fighting against the water, and with climate change now these days, we don't only have to fight against the water, but also have to fight for water to keep it in our systems, because with climate change, we also are facing droughts. Not as bad at the moment as, for example, in Paris or Mexico, but it's coming. And so it gives us a great opportunity to learn from all of your experiences and to adapt in an even better way to this challenge. So our challenge is, and I believe that applies to many other regions, is that we alternate between periods of drought and very wet periods. And these periods also becoming more extreme every year. And this means we need to design a system to handle both of them. And the large amount of water we occasionally need to process should not only be drained, but also be retained for drier periods. And that is why we are building in The Hague, for example, urban water buffers and wadis, water drainage and infiltration systems, which are nature-based and help us, keep the water inside our system and not just flush it to the sea. When it comes to fresh water, we need a large amount of fresh water for our drinking supply. And that gives us a bit of a complicated problem, because although we are surrounded by water, our drinking water supply, our fresh water supply, comes from the main rivers 30 to 40 kilometers away. from us, upstream to the east. And for Dutch IDs, that is quite a large length to overreach that water. The problem is that during droughts, the river levels, they tend to drop. And because we are at the end of the water cycle, at the end of the rivers, a few times we already had that the levels were so low that almost our water pressure, we had to lower it because we couldn't keep up with the demand of water. And that is why we are looking now for new ways to find water, for new sources, not just only the sources far upstream, but also locally. And we have the Vliet Canal. It's a canal that runs through The Hague. And that water is also in contact with a large lake in the Netherlands. It's called the IJsselmeer. And that is a good possibility for us for a new source. Only our traditional filtration techniques won't allow us to filter it for fresh water, for drinking water. We need different kind of filtration techniques, like membrane technology. And nowadays we are looking with Dunea, the drinking water company, to find a location to get that a new source of water, and also, if it works, the membrane technology, also to make a plan for how to connect and lay down the infrastructure above the ground and under the ground to bring it to their facility. But not only these examples of how very practically help us overcome our drought problems, also on an administrative level, we are trying to advocate for this. And one of our aldermen, also deputy mayor, Robert van Asten, he's a key advocate for overarching European regulation. And he was a shadow rapporteur on the Blue Deal, a report from the Committee of the Regions. And hopefully this summer, I think it's in July, the European Commission will come back with a response, and that will give us a new opportunity to ask and demand for better European regulations on this matter. Because I think that it shouldn't be just a task for a municipality or for a national country. We should join each other in this common task, especially in Europe, but also as a worldwide problem. So we should send out our information, our knowledge, and try to find a better solution for this common problem. This is just a selection of measures and actions we are taking at the moment. From a resilience standpoint, I like to emphasize that a mix of mitigation and adaptation is very important, but it is also important to talk to our citizens and to prepare them on the fact that sometimes some measures, some events you can't just mitigate or adapt to it. It will hurt at some time. And that is why I also are very pleased to see the economical numbers in your report on how many costs it will bring to countries, because I hope that will stimulate municipalities, national governments, but also European government to come up with more budgets to prevent these kinds of problems instead of paying the bill afterwards when the problems have arisen. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for that set of comments, and yeah, really quite right. Similarly to Mexico City, it's not a case of an even distribution. Half the year is very dry, half the year is exceedingly wet, and being able to plan for and manage both of those events again, a really important point to have made. Knowledge sharing, obviously really important, and that point you made at the end about the fact that while things if things happen, it will hurt. There will be a cost, and the cost is significant. So being able to anticipate and try to avoid problems as far as possible, a big message from the report. So thank you, all three of you, for the comments you've made already. We have had several questions in from the audience online. I'm going to start with one for Blanca. This is from Rodrigo, who cites back that comment about Mexico City reusing 100% of water. So he is very interested in hearing how much of that comes from wastewater, sometimes raw perhaps, that's used for irrigation in the valleys of the state of Hidalgo. That's quite a specific question. So what he really wants to hear is remarks from you on the quality-related risks of water reuse. So I'll turn to you first, and then I've got a question for Charles.
Okay, maybe to put in context the reply, to mention that there are three challenges when you are managing urban water that very often they are not taken into consideration by managers nor by society. First of all is that who are managing the urban water, they need to keep in mind, and in general, anybody that is working on the urban in the water sector, is that it is not the only sector, and we are at the service of the other sectors. That means that we need always to ensure that everybody will have water. And that's a very big difference in the ideas of managing water and how the people need to see, because sometimes say we need water for municipal purpose. You don't care about the environment. You don't care. No, the water people, we need to take about all water needs. The second is that cities are isolated. They are inside a watershed. And I think that has been mentioned by my other two colleagues. So you cannot say that we are reusing water only for the city. When you have been discharging water to other areas and they started reusing it, you become co-responsible, which is the case of Mexico City. 25% of our wastewater is reused inside Mexico City, and the 75% is already being reused in another valley. That's what I was saying. So we cannot increase our reuse without harming the farmers. And you cannot say this is the way in which IPCC says that we should be doing. No, because you are within a watershed and you need to have water solidarity. That's what also that was mentioned by our colleagues from the Netherlands. And the third thing is also important is that cities are already built and operating. So there are a lot of solutions. There are great ideas, but they are not implementable. So we need to go for solutions that can be technical, political, and social, and are viable from the social point of view. And that's why hybrid solutions have been invented, because I've heard from my two other colleagues, and I've heard a lot about green solutions. Yes, green solutions are great. I'm not saying that gray solutions are bad, because they also are still useful. And many of the cities will go for hybrid solutions. I think I replied to my Mexican colleague, because that's sure he was a Mexican.
Well, thank you for that. And just on the water, the quality issue for reused water, I did spend a few years in
Yes.
Singapore.
Yes.
And there they made a big thing out of what was called new water, which is fully reused. And there's an enormous amount of water analysis, testing to ensure it is fully high quality. Did you want to add something, Blanca?
But it's also a matter of perception. We have been teaching people from for hundreds of years that wastewater is bad, that people cannot conceive reusing wastewater. That's why we are using different terms, reclaiming water, to try to change these ideas. And we can treat water up to a very high level. One very good example is just all the astronauts that goes into the space without water. And we know how to clean it. It's a matter of price, but we know how to make it safe. But still people don't always trust the reuse of wastewater. So that's why all these solutions have a very important cultural and social component that we need to develop. And it's not an easy thing to do it when you have other sectors like the health sector, which is the case in many, many countries. The main people opposing to water reuse are people that work on the health sector because they feel responsible for what is going to happen. It's not the society. So we need to also to put them into the context and just say, well, you just need to find a way to give water to everybody. And they need to start thinking in a different way.
Well, thank you for the extra comments. Really very, very interesting. Next, I'm going to go to a question for Charles from Bashir. And this was talking about managing water consumption levels. Possible to envisage imposing a green tax on institutions and families when they exceed a reasonable limit, consumption limit, in order to avoid inefficient and excessive consumption of water. Charles.
It's a good question. And indeed, in France, we are experiencing the seasonal price. So some big city like Toulouse in the southwest are testing that kind of taxing. So the price of water depends on the season when you are consuming it. So the idea is to prevent over consumptions during summer when the city and the territory is suffering from a regular drought. Another idea also tested in France is a progressive price. So it means that everybody is paying the same price for the first water meter square consumed, and then the price is increasing progressively. So the idea that whatever your family, it can depend on how many people is living with you. You have a first base price, and when you are going through what we can consider like reasonable consumptions, you pay more. So this is a kind of a tax in the idea of to answer the question.
Yes, I think it's certainly a very good point that it's hard to value something you get for free or you can perceive as a completely free resource. So interesting, some different approaches. Now I've got a question for Sophie from Joy. So this is around adapting to the consequences of drought and water scarcity from the point of view of cooperation and understanding on the part of citizens within the city. So is there a success story in this regard, perhaps around information sharing or community engagement that would get citizens along to build their cooperation?
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks a lot for this question. Actually, when we conducted our work, the project, we found a super interesting experimentation in Ile-de-France, in the Paris Metropolitan Region. It's not actually an experimentation now, it's a well-known organization. It's called Aquibri. It's an association that was set up in the 90s in response to the deterioration in the quality and levels of specific aquifer. And so this association brings together government, department, local authorities, town councils, the French Water Agency, agricultural and industrial users, as well as water producers, and it's managed by scientists with the aim of managing the aquifer collaboratively. So Aquibri, the association, proposed an approach to aquifer management based on an analysis of groundwater levels, rainfall, river flow rates, and other quality data. They share the information and they try to maintain the level of the aquifer at a given size, 8, and they adapt the authorization for water abstraction, so to make sure that this level will stay above a certain threshold. So it's purely based on scientific analysis, but it's also a lot relying on training, engaging with stakeholders and all the people who are actually benefiting from this aquifer. And it has been very successful in the past years, and is an initiative that we mention in the report and that we think can be replicated more broadly.
No, thanks, Sophie, and I think that's definitely an incentive to read the report in some detail. A large number of stakeholders to bring on board together. Got another question now. This one for both Walter and Blanca from Halil, and this is around the cost of drought incidents. So Sophie talked about the impact on Paris being 2.5 billion plus euros for each drought event. So do either of you have information about the impacts for either The Hague or for Mexico City? And are there any impacts for industry that we might not initially think of beyond the obvious one of the agriculture sector? I'm not sure, we might have lost Blanca, at least temporarily. So shall we go to Walter to answer that question first?
Yes, I don't have exactly insights in what the costs are in drought periods, but one of the major costs, and I don't know the exact numbers, is that droughts are really affecting our less strong, resilient urban residents where there are old houses and they have really this problem with the fundaments of the houses, because the droughts make sure that the ground levels are dropping, and when they're dropping they are exposed to air, and because of our location these ground level waters can rise really fast again. That's because we are so close to the coast. And not only just normal groundwater comes up, but also with, and especially in the upcoming years, maybe also with some salination with it. And that will really harm our houses that are affected by the rising ground levels. In The Hague, we have a famous line. It's the street called the Laan van Meerdervoort, and it separates the city in the part that is built on sand, where the better houses are built, and the clay, the clay turf, where these less strongly built houses are. And some of those neighborhoods, some of those areas, we are really facing problems with the sustainability of those houses. If we are facing more and more droughts and very wet periods, which will change the ground level waters very much, then in 10, 20 years, some of those houses are facing, maybe even demolition because they aren't sustainable anymore. So I think it could be potentially into the billions if we do not act quickly.
Yeah, that's very telling and definitely bringing it home to individual households, but a large number of households quite
Exactly.
clearly. A big looming problem. Blanca has rejoined us. I don't know if you heard the question. This was around whether there is any estimate that you are aware of the cost to Mexico City of a major drought event. This was after the report that Sophie presented talked about a cost of at least 2.5 billion euros per drought event being the impact for Paris.
Well, not really. Well, I think it's not working once again. Well, but not really.
We can hear you. Or we could
Okay, I
hear
think it's
you.
working now.
Yes.
Well, not really. We don't have I don't have the information of the cost of the droughts, but I do have more the information on the cost of bringing new water supply because for costing droughts is not only the cost for bringing new water. Oh.
We don't seem to have a very good connection there, unfortunately. So I will move on with apologies because we have a few more questions. We have one for Sophie from Sophie. How did the OECD include the possibility of for upstream dams of Paris not to fill up during winter? They usually play a strong mitigating role against droughts, but I understand there was a risk of them not being able to fulfill that role with climate change. Sophie, are you able to answer that one?
Yes, actually, it's a very good question. When we started the project, we were wondering how to consider this reservoir in our analysis. And it happens that the French institution that is managing this lake reservoir, called EPTB Seine-Grand Lac, actually did this analysis. So the climate projection we used in our report, our climate projection that this institution have used, because they wanted to check whether the lakes were beneficial in terms of river flows in case of droughts. So they simulated actually the 1921 drought, the one we used in our report, and they looked at how the reservoir would be filled in that case, which means that the simulation that we have done are actually reflecting real life experience in a way, even though simulation, because we consider this lake reservoir. So it has been taken into consideration. And what we see is that in the drought we used, the reservoir would be filled up to 30%, depending on which one, but it's between 26 and 34% for the different reservoirs. Thanks for the question.
Well, that's great. You covered that in such detail. Look, I think I've got time for a couple more questions. Now, this one is for either Charles or Walter. From Alison. Alison is interested to learn more about integrating nature-based solutions in cities to help with the natural filtration of water. So are there any specific examples either of you could refer to that have proved to be successful? I don't know who wants to go first. Charles, maybe this time.
Okay, thank you. There is a massive action in France which is very popular, is to give back to nature a school courtyard. So it's called Oasis, and it's implemented in every region of France thanks to public funding from the state water agencies. And the idea is to de-sealing French school courtyard to promote infiltration, but also to struggle against heat island effect during summer. So it has multiple gifts and assets to de-seal school courtyard. It's very popular among municipalities, and they are very helping and demanding to have fun to develop that strategy. It's just a little example for the daily life.
Excellent, thank you. Thank you. Walter, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I could add several things. I think we have a knowledge institute called Deltares who has got great ideas on all kinds of nature-based solutions. We had a very large program in the Netherlands, what is called giving room to rivers, where we made sure that rivers could flow in their natural flow through the landscape, which was quite successful. And in the Netherlands, we have the Dutch Championship of Flipping Tiles, which means that you have to flip out all the stone from your yard and to plant trees, grass, etc. And that's a real championship, an official championship in the Netherlands. And every year there's a municipality who wins the first prize. And unfortunately, we lost last year, but we were the champions in the years before. So I think that is something people can all do. Just get rid of those stones and plant some trees in and around among their houses.
Well, better luck with the stone flipping championship next year. Hope you win again. And I think probably the last question. We'll see how we go on time. This one is for Sophie from Jean-Baptiste. Ultimately, isn't water reuse a problem, or rather a displacement of a problem, because the water doesn't return to the environment and can therefore create a shortage elsewhere in the logic of the water cycle? So we are creating a problem of shortage through water reuse.
Thanks for this very relevant question again. So when we talk about water reuse in the report, we talked about very different types of sources. And it's true that when you are not a coastal city, water reuse in the sense of reclaimed water can be problematic. To give you an example, in the Paris Metropolitan Area, we learned with our report that actually the water that is coming out of the water sanitation facility support up to 70% of the river flow, the Seine river flow, during the summer months. So it's quite significant, and it could be actually an issue if we use reclaimed water on a very large basis. But then you have very different kind of water reuse option that can be considered. So I think in the presentation I mentioned gray water. Gray water are all the water that are not sanitary water that can be reused on a very local and very specific scale, so habitat scale, more or less. You have the mine water, the swimming pool waters, for instance, swimming pool water in one of the cities of the Paris Metropolitan Area actually cover all the gardening needs for the city. So it means that instead of releasing an amount of water that is not so important for the hydrological cycle, you can substitute water use of the municipality that would have been a pressure on water resources instead. Same for rainwater and rainwater reuse at local scale that can be a substitute, and then will go anywhere in the water sanitation distribution network and will help cover the river flow. But it's only a matter of scale, and it's true that whatever the case of water reuse technology you use, you need to assess on a large scale what would be the risk of maladaptation, if any. But so on a case-by-case basis, I would say.
Well, thanks very much for that. I'm just going to finish with one general question and a super quick answer. And this is one of the things that was focused on. Sometimes there's a lack of public awareness of our water risks, especially in terms of the supply deficit for both citizens and sectors. That can be a bit of a key barrier. What do you see, if anybody wants a quick comment, what do you see as a top priority for increasing public or sector awareness of the risks? Anyone want to answer? Charles?
From my experience, for certain industrial or economic sectors, when they come to realize how much they can lost with future drought, it's a true incentive to act now to be spared from a dramatical loss further in business or in economics due to lack of waters. So this kind of awareness of projections can help them and be an incentive to act now and not later and too late.
Yes, I think that's correct. Walter, do you want to say something?
Yeah, at the moment we are facing in the Netherlands a congestion on the power grid. So that means we have problems reconnecting new businesses, new residential neighborhoods for electricity. And that really made people more aware about the use of electricity. But the same problem we are also facing with drinking water. We have many problems at the moment of finding enough fresh water to convert in drinking water to supply new businesses, new residential areas, and I think that can help. But maybe also to give people a little bit of hope. For example, the greenhouse horticulture in the Westland, it's quite near to us. They are excellent in innovating to get more use of one single drop of water. They almost reuse the water constantly, and at the end they have just 1% of the water left, which is too salty and with too much other stuff in it, so they can't use it anymore. But that gives hope for all of us how to innovate and to be more efficient with our water. But we are facing the same problems just like our power grid congestion, if it concerns drinking water.
Yeah, I think waiting for disaster brings it home to everybody, but it's not a nice way to learn about it. So making every drop count, super important. Well, we're pretty much out of time. So in order to finish everything off, I really want to thank our speakers. Blanca, who unfortunately her connection was a little bit unstable, so she has left us. But Charles and Walter as well for sharing what have been really interesting and valuable insights today. I hope our audience found the session as engaging and useful as I did. We've learned a lot that countries are increasingly focused on building resilience to water scarcity, and they're recognizing the challenges posed by rapid urbanization and, of course, both economic and population growth. We've also seen that strengthening drought resilience requires a whole of government approach, a multi-stakeholder approach, one that goes beyond urban planning and water management to include key sectors like manufacturing and agriculture. As these risks continue to rise around the world, we hope our work at the OECD is going to help countries identify and implement effective adaptation measures and policies to address the challenges. And on that note, I am pleased to share that our teams are continuing their work and will soon be releasing a new report on global drought risks. So in the meantime, for those of you interested in a deeper dive into our findings on the Paris Metropolitan Area, please explore our report, which is freely accessible on the OECD website. And the links have also been shared by my colleagues in the Zoom chat. So thank you. Finally, a big thank you to all our participants for joining us today, to the wonderful OECD team who organised and have run it, and to everyone for your thoughtful questions, and to our panelists, of course, for your even more thoughtful responses. We look forward to welcoming you to our next Green Talk live session. With that, I want to wish you all a very wonderful week. Thank you and goodbye.